A baby found a trapped dog. What happened next will melt your heart. Chapter 1. The Yellow House on Maple Street. The rain was a weeping thing that day, a heavy, sorrowful downpour that blurred the world into shades of grey and green. It beat against the windows of the little yellow house at the end of Maple Street with a relentless rhythm, a drumbeat of melancholy that seemed to seep into the very bones of the place. Each drop was a tiny tear, cascading down the panes of glass, obscuring the already dreary backyard in a veil of shimmering distortion. Inside, 5-year-old Noah Wilson, a small, bright spark in the gathering gloom, pressed his nose against the cold glass. His breath, warm and eager, bloomed into little foggy circles that momentarily eclipsed the outside world. He traced patterns on them with a grubby finger, his attention completely absorbed by the miniature dramas unfolding just beyond his reach. The backyard had transformed into a swirling landscape of miniature lakes and rushing rivers. Puddles, once harmless depressions in the earth, had swollen into reflecting pools, mirroring the turbulent sky above. Noah's blue eyes, usually sparkling with mischief and curiosity, were now narrowed in concentration, following the frantic race of raindrops as they streaked down the window pane. He silently cheered them on, each drop a tiny chariot, vying for the grand prize of reaching the bottom first. He imagined them as valiant knights, battling the forces of gravity and friction, their silver armor gleaming in the watery light. "Noah, stay away from the windows during the storm," his mother, Grace, called from the kitchen. Her voice was gentle but firm, laced with the weary tone of a single parent carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. The kitchen, usually a haven of warmth and delicious smells, was now a steamy, chaotic space filled with the clatter of dishes and the scent of soapy water. Grace was washing up after a hurried lunch, her hands submerged in a frothy sea of bubbles. Her brown hair, usually neatly styled, was pulled back into a messy bun, strands escaping to frame her face in a disheveled halo. The rain seemed to amplify every sound in the small house, the drumming on the roof, the gurgling of the drain pipe, the sighing whisper of the wind as it snaked its way through cracks in the window frames. It was a symphony of domesticity, underscored by the ominous rumble of the storm. "And remember," she continued, her voice rising slightly to be heard over the din, "no going outside today. The alley behind our house floods when it rains this hard. It's not safe." Noah nodded, his eyes still glued to the window, his small face illuminated by the grey light. "Okay, Mum," he mumbled, but his mind was already a whirlwind of forbidden desires. He pictured himself splashing in those ever-growing puddles, feeling the cold, exhilarating kiss of the rain on his face. He imagined jumping from one watery island to another, a brave explorer navigating a flooded landscape, his bright yellow raincoat and matching boots, his only protection against the elements. The image was so vivid, so enticing, that he could almost feel the cool water seeping into his socks, the thrill of defiance coursing through his veins. He longed to feel the untamed energy of the storm, to become a part of its wild, untethered dance. Grace sighed as she dried her hands on a faded kitchen towel. She knew that look in her son's eyes. It was the same curious, adventurous spark that his father, James, had carried within him, a flame that burned brightly until it was extinguished far too soon. James, her beloved husband, a man who had lived and breathed the call of duty, a police officer who had always sought to protect the innocent and uphold the law, gone now, taken by a cruel twist of fate, leaving Grace to raise their son alone, a constant ache in her heart, a reminder of what they had lost. The memories, unbidden, flooded her mind, washing over her with the force of the storm outside. James, laughing, tossing Noah into the air, his blue eyes mirroring his son's. James reading bedtime stories, his voice a soothing balm against the terrors of the night. James gone, leaving a void that could never be filled. She knelt beside Noah, gently turning his face toward hers, her touch light but insistent. "Promise me you won't go wandering off," she said, her voice laced with a plea. "Especially not to that alley. It's dangerous when it rains. The water rises so quickly and there's all sorts of debris that gets washed down there." Her words were a mixture of concern and fear, a desperate attempt to protect her son from the perils of the world, a world that had already taken so much from her. She couldn't lose him too. He was her everything. Chapter 2. A Promise and a Whisper of Mischief. Noah, ever the quick study, met his mother's worried gaze with an earnest innocence that could melt glaciers. His blue eyes, usually dancing with playful light, softened, mirroring the deep pools of concern reflected in her own. He knew that look, the one that spoke of sleepless nights and unspoken fears, the one that reminded him, in his own small way, of the gaping hole his father had left behind. He didn't fully understand death, not really, but he understood absence, the heavy silence that filled the house sometimes, the way his mother would stare off into the distance, lost in a world he couldn't reach. He didn't want to cause her any more pain. "I promise," he said, his voice clear and steady, the words carefully chosen to reassure her. But even as he spoke the vow, his fingers, hidden behind his back, were crossed in a silent act of defiance. A tiny rebellion against the adult world, a whisper of mischief that betrayed his outward compliance. It wasn't that he didn't love his mother or that he intended to deliberately hurt her. It was just... The alley beckoned. The storm sang a song of adventure that he couldn't resist. Grace, ever vigilant, searched his face, her eyes scanning for any sign of deceit. She knew her son. She knew that spark, that irrepressible thirst for exploration that mirrored James so perfectly. It was a beautiful quality, a testament to the vibrant life that burned within him. But it was also a source of constant worry. The world was a dangerous place, especially for a small boy with a boundless imagination and a tendency to wander. But Noah's gaze held firm, unwavering in its sincerity. She saw the love in his eyes, the genuine desire to ease her worry. And perhaps she also saw a flicker of that James-like stubbornness, that quiet determination that would not be swayed. Reluctantly, she released his face, her touch lingering for a moment longer than necessary. She kissed his forehead, her lips brushing against his soft, damp hair. "Be careful, my little explorer," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're all I have." With that, she returned to the kitchen, the clatter of dishes resuming, the rhythmic whir of the mixer soon filling the air. She was making cookies, Noah's favorite afternoon activity on rainy days. It was a ritual, a small attempt to bring normalcy and joy to their lives amidst the lingering shadow of grief. The sweet scent of vanilla and sugar would hopefully permeate the house, chasing away the gloom and filling the air with a comforting warmth. As soon as she turned on the mixer, its loud drone effectively masking any other sounds, Noah saw his chance. His heart quickened with a mixture of anticipation and guilt. He knew he was breaking his promise, that he was betraying his mother's trust, but the allure of the storm, the whispered promise of adventure, was too strong to resist. He slipped quietly into the mudroom, the small space at the back of the house that served as a buffer between the cozy interior and the untamed world outside. It was a repository of forgotten things, a jumble of boots, coats, and gardening tools, all imbued with the earthy scent of the outdoors. He pulled on his bright yellow raincoat, the plastic slick and cold against his skin. It was a gift from his grandmother, a practical garment designed to ward off the elements. He remembered his father lifting him into it, zipping it up with a flourish, declaring him ready to face any adventure the world might throw his way. The memory brought a pang of sadness, a bittersweet reminder of happier times. Then he tugged his rubber boots over his small feet, the familiar squeak of the rubber a comforting sound. They were a matching yellow, completing his armor against the rain. He felt a surge of determination, a sense of purpose that pushed aside any lingering doubts. With one last glance toward the kitchen, where the mixer whirred loudly, its mechanical rhythm a constant presence in the background, he unlocked the back door. The metal latch clicked softly, a tiny sound that seemed amplified in the sudden hush. He hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering on the doorknob, his conscience whispering a warning. But the storm called to him, its siren song, beckoning him to the wild embrace of the rain-soaked world. He pushed the door open and stepped out into the storm. Chapter 3: A World Painted in Rain. The rain greeted him with an immediate, bracing slap. Cold droplets lashed at his face, running down his cheeks like icy tears, finding their way into his collar and sending a shiver down his spine. It was an invigorating assault, a baptism into the wild heart of the storm. But Noah didn't mind. In fact, he grinned, the corners of his mouth tilting upwards in a mischievous smile. The rain was an accomplice, a co-conspirator in his act of defiance. He tipped his head back, letting the rain pelt his face, opening his mouth to catch the droplets on his tongue. They tasted of ozone and earth, a primal, exhilarating flavor that filled him with a sense of reckless abandon. He felt alive, truly alive, in a way that he never did within the confines of the little yellow house. Then, with a whoop of pure, unadulterated joy, he jumped. He landed right in the middle of a massive puddle, sending a geyser of water erupting around him. It splashed up, soaking his pants beneath his raincoat, the cold, wet fabric clinging to his skin. But the discomfort was insignificant, a mere pinprick compared to the overwhelming joy of freedom. He giggled, a high, unrestrained sound that was swallowed by the wind and the rain. He was free, free from the confines of the house, free from the weight of his mother's worry, free to explore the untamed wilderness that the storm had created. He was an adventurer, a pioneer, charting a course through a landscape transformed by the elements. His yellow raincoat billowed around him like a miniature sail, catching the wind and propelling him forward. He made his way toward the alley, the forbidden territory that his mother had warned him against. It was a magnet, a lure too strong to resist. The very fact that it was off-limits only made it more enticing. He knew he was being disobedient, that his mother would be disappointed, even angry, if she knew what he was doing, but he couldn't help himself. The thrill of the unknown, the whispered promise of discovery, outweighed any sense of guilt or fear. He told himself that he would only go a little way just to see what it was like. He would be careful, he would be quick, and he would be back before his mother even realized he was gone. The alley beckoned, a dark, narrow passage squeezed between the tall brick buildings that loomed on either side. It was a stark contrast to the open yard, a shadowy realm where the rain seemed to fall with even greater intensity, creating a curtain that separated this secret world from his normal life. The air was thick with the smell of wet brick, decaying leaves, and something else, something indefinable and slightly unsettling. It was the scent of hidden things, of forgotten corners, of secrets whispered in the shadows. Noah jumped from puddle to puddle, each splash a step further into adventure, each step taking him further from home. The water was deeper here, the puddles larger, more treacherous. He had to pick his way carefully, testing the depth with the toe of his boot before committing himself to each leap. Lightning flashed overhead, briefly illuminating the narrow space between buildings in a stark, blinding light. For a moment, everything was etched in sharp relief, the rough texture of the brick, the swirling patterns in the puddles, the outline of a discarded tire leaning against the wall. Then, just as quickly, the light was gone, plunging the alley back into darkness. Thunder rumbled so loudly that Noah felt it in his chest, a deep, resonant vibration that shook him to his core. The sound reverberated between the buildings, echoing and amplifying until it seemed to fill the entire world. For a moment, fear flickered inside him, a cold, unwelcome guest. Maybe his mother was right. Maybe he shouldn't be here. Maybe he should turn back before things got any worse. The rain was intensifying, the wind was picking up, and the alley seemed to be growing darker and more menacing with each passing moment. But then he heard it, a sound so faint, so fragile, that at first he thought it was just the wind or the rain hitting metal in an odd way. He stopped moving, holding his breath to listen better, his small body tense with anticipation. Chapter 4, A Cry in the Storm. There it was again. A weak cry, almost like a whisper, carried on the wind, but somehow filled with an unmistakable pain. It was a sound that tugged at his heart, a fragile plea that resonated deep within his soul. It wasn't the sound of the storm, the howl of the wind, or the rumble of thunder. It was something else, something alive, something or someone calling out in distress. Noah's heart beat faster, a frantic drum against his ribs. He took a few tentative steps forward, then stopped again, straining to listen, his senses on high alert. The sound came from further down the alley, near a large storm drain where rainwater rushed like a small, turbulent river. The drain was a gaping maw in the ground, a dark, forbidding entrance to the unseen world beneath the city. The water churned and swirled around its edges, carrying with it a swirling mess of debris, leaves, twigs, discarded plastic bottles, and the occasional stray piece of garbage. "Hello?" Noah called out, his voice small and tentative against the rumble of the storm. The word was swallowed by the wind, rendered almost inaudible by the sheer force of the elements. He felt a surge of self-consciousness, a foolishness at calling out into the empty alley, as if expecting some unseen creature to respond. No answer came. The only sound was the relentless drumming of the rain, the rushing of the water, and the distant rumble of thunder. He was about to dismiss the sound as his imagination, a product of the eerie atmosphere and his own overactive mind, when lightning flashed again. The sudden burst of light momentarily transformed the alley, revealing details that had been hidden in the shadows. And in that fleeting glimpse, Noah caught a glimpse of something moving near the drain. Something big and dark, half submerged in the swirling water. It was just a quick impression, a momentary flicker against the backdrop of the storm, but it was enough to rekindle his curiosity and banish his lingering doubts. His breath caught in his throat, a mixture of fear and anticipation. He knew with a certainty that defied logic that whatever had made that sound, whatever he had seen moving near the drain, needed his help. He inched closer, his small legs moving cautiously through the rising water, his rubber boots squelching with each step. Curiosity overpowered his fear, drawing him forward like a moth to a flame. He told himself that he would just take a quick look, just to make sure everything was all right. He would stay close to the edge of the alley, where he could easily turn back if things got too scary. As he approached the storm drain, the sound became clearer, a whimpering punctuated by weak, raspy breaths. It was a sound of pure suffering, a desperate plea for help that tugged at his heartstrings. The sound spurred him onward, driving him to overcome his fear and embrace the unknown. Lightning flashed once more, illuminating the scene with a stark, almost theatrical brilliance, and Noah gasped. There, half submerged in the rising water, was a large German shepherd. Its fur was matted and dirty, plastered to its body by the rain. Its body was trembling violently in the cold, its muscles visibly shivering beneath its soaked fur. One of its back legs appeared to be caught between rusted metal pipes that formed part of the drainage system, a tangled mess of corroded metal and swirling water. Each time the dog tried to pull itself free, it let out a pained whimper, a sound that broke Noah's heart into a million pieces. The scene was a tableau of misery, a snapshot of suffering etched against the backdrop of the raging storm. The alley seemed to hold its breath, the rain momentarily abating as if in silent reverence for the creature's plight. Noah stood frozen, his small body trembling with a mixture of fear and compassion. He knew in that instant that he couldn't turn away. He had to help. He had to do something, even if it meant facing his fears and breaking his promise. The dog was counting on him. Chapter 5, An Exchange of Souls. The dog's eyes, intelligent and deep brown, locked with Noah's. They were windows into a soul burdened by pain, fear, and a desperate plea that transcended the barrier between human and animal. He saw a depth of suffering that mirrored his own, a shared understanding of loss and loneliness. There was a glint of wildness, a primal instinct for survival, but also a spark of hope, a flicker of trust that shone through the layers of despair. They were the eyes of a creature trapped, not just physically, but emotionally, eyes that had seen too much, felt too much, and endured too much, eyes that begged for release. In that moment, something shifted inside the boy. The promise he had made to his mother, the storm raging around him, even his own small size, all faded into insignificance. He forgot about the potential consequences, the possible dangers. All he could see was a living creature suffering, needing help that no one else was around to give. It was a primal urge, a deeply ingrained instinct to protect the vulnerable, to offer solace to the distressed. He took a careful step closer, then another, his small feet splashing through the rising water. The dog's ears flattened against its head, a clear sign of distress. A weak growl rumbled from its throat, a warning, a desperate attempt to ward off any further threat. It was a sound that spoke of exhaustion and pain, the last vestige of defense from an animal pushed to its breaking point. "It's okay," Noah said softly, his voice trembling but filled with sincerity. He held out his small hand, palm down, the way his father had taught him to approach unfamiliar dogs. "I won't hurt you." It was a simple gesture, a silent offering of peace. He remembered his father saying that animals could sense fear, that they could smell the adrenaline coursing through your veins. He forced himself to take a deep breath, to calm his racing heart, to project an aura of serenity. The German shepherd continued to growl, its body tense despite its obvious exhaustion. Every muscle was coiled, ready to spring into action if necessary. But there was a hesitation in its posture, a flicker of uncertainty in its eyes. It was as if the dog was weighing its options, assessing the threat posed by this small, rain-soaked figure. Noah stopped moving, giving the animal space, respecting its boundaries. He understood, instinctively, that trust had to be earned, not demanded. He stood there, a tiny figure against the backdrop of the storm, a beacon of hope in the heart of the darkness. Rain poured over both of them, washing away the dirt and grime, blurring the lines between boy and beast. They stood there, two creatures brought together by chance, connected by a shared experience of suffering and a glimmer of hope. A tiny boy in a bright yellow raincoat and a large, powerful dog, brought low by pain and fear. They were an unlikely pair, an unexpected alliance forged in the crucible of the storm. Noah remembered something his father had told him, a lesson learned during his time as a canine officer. He had said these words before leaving for work that final day. "Animals can feel what's in your heart, Noah. If you're scared, they'll be scared too. If you're kind, they'll know it. Let them see your soul, son, and they will trust you." So Noah closed his eyes for a moment, pushing away his fear, focusing on the warmth of his compassion, the strength of his resolve. He thought of his father, of his unwavering dedication to protecting the innocent, of his belief in the inherent goodness of all creatures. When he opened them again, he took a slow, deliberate breath and whispered, "Don't be scared. I found you." It was a simple statement, a heartfelt promise delivered in a voice filled with sincerity, and something unexpected happened. Chapter 6, A Bridge of Trust. The dog stopped growling. The low, guttural rumble that had been vibrating in the air subsided, replaced by a tentative silence. Its ears, which had been flattened against its head in fear, twitched forward slightly, a subtle but significant change in posture. It made a different sound now, a soft, almost questioning whimper, a fragile note of vulnerability that resonated with Noah's own feelings of uncertainty. The change was subtle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. It was as if the dog had sensed something in Noah's voice, in his presence, something that transformed its fear into something else. Not quite trust, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of it. A flicker of hope that had been dormant beneath the layers of pain and fear was now slowly beginning to awaken. Noah took this as an invitation to move closer, a silent signal that he was not perceived as a threat. He approached slowly, deliberately, speaking in the same gentle voice, his words chosen with care. He knew that one wrong move, one sudden gesture, could shatter the fragile bridge of trust that was beginning to form. "You're stuck, huh?" he said, his voice soft and soothing, like a lullaby. That must hurt really bad. He was close enough now to see the details of the dog's predicament, the way its leg was trapped, wedged tightly between two rusted pipes where the storm drain had partially collapsed. The metal was jagged and corroded, a dangerous trap that had ensnared the unsuspecting animal. The water level was rising with the relentless rain, already reaching the dog's belly. Noah knew with a growing sense of urgency that if the storm continued, the animal would drown before it could free itself. Time was running out. The German shepherd's eyes never left Noah's face. There was something in those eyes, something almost human in their intelligence and depth. They seemed to hold stories, secrets, perhaps even recognition of some kind. It was as if the dog was trying to communicate something, to convey a message that transcended words. Noah felt a strange connection forming, a bond that defied explanation. It was more than just pity, more than just compassion. It was a feeling of kinship, a sense of shared destiny. He felt a pull towards this creature, a deep-seated urge to protect it, to save it from its suffering. The feeling resonated deeply in his chest, a warmth that spread through his limbs, filling him with a renewed sense of purpose. "My name's Noah," he said, as if introducing himself to a new friend. "What's yours?" It was a silly thing to say, he knew, expecting a dog to respond with its name. But it felt right, a way to acknowledge the animal as an individual, a sentient being deserving of respect and compassion. The dog, of course, didn't answer, but it did something that made Noah's breath catch in his throat. It stopped struggling. For a moment it ceased its desperate attempts to free itself, as if conserving its energy, as if listening intently to the boy's words. And then it leaned its head toward Noah's outstretched hand, not quite touching, but close enough that Noah could feel its warm breath on his fingers. It was a moment of profound connection, a silent exchange of souls that seemed to transcend the limitations of language and species. It was a gesture of trust, an offering of vulnerability from an animal that had every reason to be suspicious. It was a moment that would forever be etched in Noah's memory. Noah felt tears mixing with the raindrops on his face, blurring his vision. He didn't know why he was crying, only that he felt something powerful and important was happening in this dark, wet alley. He felt a surge of love and compassion for this injured animal, a fierce determination to help it, no matter the cost. "I'm going to help you," Noah promised, his voice stronger now, filled with conviction. "I'm not leaving you here." He moved to the side of the storm drain, trying to get a better look at how the dog was trapped, his small hands instinctively reaching out to assess the situation. He knew that he had to find a way to free this creature, to alleviate its suffering. He had made a promise, and he intended to keep it. Chapter 7, An Impossible Task. The metal pipes that had caught the dog's leg were a cruel puzzle, a twisted configuration of rusted iron and broken concrete. They were part of an old drainage system, likely damaged during recent construction work in the neighborhood. Negligence, pure and simple, Noah thought, his small fist clenching in anger. Someone's carelessness had created this death trap, and an innocent animal was paying the price. One pipe had bent at an odd angle, creating a gap just wide enough for the dog's leg to slip through, but not wide enough for it to pull free. It was a classic trap, a one-way street that offered easy entry but denied escape. The edges of the pipe were sharp and jagged, stained with rust and grime. Noah could see where the dog had struggled, the fur around its leg, matted with blood and dirt. He reached out his small hands, testing the strength of the pipes, probing for any weakness in their construction. The metal was cold and slippery with rain, and sharp in places where it had broken. He winced as his fingers brushed against a particularly jagged edge, drawing a small bead of blood. But he didn't pull back, his determination unwavering. The dog watched him wearily, its intelligent eyes following his every move. It made no move to bite or growl again, its energy seemingly depleted. Instead, it seemed to be studying the boy, perhaps wondering what this small human could possibly do to help, when the dog's own considerable strength had failed to free it. Did it even understand what he was trying to do? Or did it just see another threat, another source of potential pain? "This might hurt a little," Noah warned, his voice soft and reassuring. He didn't want to cause the animal any more distress, but he knew that he had to try. "But I have to try." He needed to let the dog know that he wasn't intending to cause harm, that his intentions were purely benevolent. Communication was key, even with an animal that couldn't understand his words. The dog's eyes seemed to understand, or at least to accept his intentions. It braced itself, muscles tensing beneath its soaked fur. It was a gesture of trust, a silent agreement to cooperate in whatever rescue attempt the boy might attempt. Noah placed his hands on the pipe, trapping the dog's leg, his small fingers wrapping around the cold, unforgiving metal. He took a deep breath, focusing all his energy on the task at hand. He knew that this was an impossible task, that he was too small, too weak to move these heavy, rusted pipes. But he had to try. He had made a promise and he wouldn't break it. He pushed against the pipe with all his might, his face reddening with effort, his small arms straining. The muscles in his shoulders burned, and his breath came in ragged gasps. He pushed and pushed, but the pipe didn't budge. It was as if it was set in stone, unyielding to his puny strength. He tried again, pushing from a different angle, hoping to find a leverage point, a weak spot that he could exploit. But the result was the same. The metal was too strong, too firmly embedded in concrete and years of rust to be moved by a 5-year-old's strength. Frustration welled up inside him, a bitter taste of defeat. He was too small, too weak, too young to make any difference. He had thought he could save this creature, that he could overcome any obstacle with enough determination. But now he realized that he was helpless, that he was powerless against the forces of nature and the indifference of man. Tears sprang to his eyes again, this time from disappointment in himself. He felt a surge of shame, a sense of inadequacy that threatened to overwhelm him. He had failed. He had made a promise that he couldn't keep. Chapter 8. Hope in Brown Eyes. The dog must have sensed his distress, the rising tide of disappointment threatening to drown him in despair, because it made a soft sound, a low, comforting murmur that resonated deep within its chest. It wasn't a whimper of pain this time, but something gentler, something almost encouraging. Noah looked at the dog's face, his tears luring his vision. And he was struck by what seemed like encouragement in those intelligent eyes. It was as if the dog was telling him not to give up, that there was still hope, that they could still find a way. The dog's gaze was steady, unwavering, filled with a warmth that melted the icy grip of his fear. It was a look that said, "I believe in you, even if you don't believe in yourself." "I won't give up," Noah whispered, as much to himself as to the dog. The words were a vow, a renewed commitment to the impossible task. He couldn't let this creature down. He had promised to help, and he would keep that promise no matter the cost. He would find a way, even if it seemed impossible. He looked around the alley, his eyes scanning the surroundings for something, anything, that might help him. He needed a tool, a lever, something to amplify his strength, to give him an edge against the unyielding metal. Despair threatened to creep back into his soul. The alley was a desolate landscape of discarded objects, a wasteland of broken dreams and forgotten promises. There were overturned trash cans, their contents spilling onto the ground in a grotesque display of decay. There were stacks of discarded tires, black and ominous, looming like silent sentinels. There were broken pallets leaning against the wall, their splintered wood offering no solace. Near a dumpster, its rusted metal scarred with graffiti and age, he spotted something that sparked a flicker of hope. A broken piece of wood, long and relatively straight, that might serve as a lever. It was just a discarded scrap, a piece of refuse that had been cast aside and forgotten. But to Noah, it was a lifeline, a potential key to unlocking the dog's prison. He ran to grab it, his small legs pumping through the ankle-deep water, his heart pounding with renewed determination. The wood was heavy and rough, splintered at the edges, but it felt solid and sturdy in his hands. It was a tool, a weapon, a symbol of his renewed hope. He returned to the storm drain, his eyes fixed on the trapped dog, his resolve strengthened by his discovery. He knelt beside the drain, positioning the wood between the pipes, carefully wedging it into a crevice that offered some purchase. He knew that this was a long shot, that the wood might break, that his efforts might be futile. But he had to try. He took a deep breath, focusing all his energy on the task at hand. He placed all his weight on the makeshift lever, his small body trembling with the effort. For a breathless moment, nothing happened. The wood creaked and groaned under the strain, threatening to snap. The pipes remained stubbornly unyielding. Then, with a groan of protesting metal, a sound that echoed through the alley like a tortured scream, the pipe shifted slightly. Not much, barely perceptible, but enough to create a slightly wider gap, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. The dog immediately understood. Its eyes widened, its muscles tensed. It pushed against the pipe with its body, throwing its weight against the rusted metal, straining every muscle in its weary frame. It was a desperate act, a last-ditch attempt to escape its prison. Noah held the gap open with his improvised lever, his arms trembling with the effort, his fingers cold and wet from the rain, losing their grip on the slippery wood. He knew he couldn't hold it much longer. His strength was fading, his body was failing him. He was reaching the limits of his endurance. "Please," he begged, though he wasn't sure who he was asking for help. The dog, the storm, or something greater than both. "Please work." Chapter 9, Freedom's Price. As if in answer to his desperate plea, lightning struck somewhere nearby, illuminating the alley in a stark white light. A brief but blinding flash that seemed to amplify the drama unfolding in that desolate space. It was as if the heavens themselves were watching, holding their breath in anticipation of the outcome. In that flash, Noah saw the dog gather its remaining strength, a surge of adrenaline coursing through its weary body. It was mustering one final push, a desperate gamble for freedom, and in that same instant, Noah's own small muscles gave one last, desperate effort on the lever, a final burst of energy fueled by adrenaline and pure, unadulterated hope. He poured every ounce of his being into that single moment, his face contorted with effort, his teeth gritted in determination. There was a scraping sound, a screech of metal against metal, a grating noise that sent shivers down Noah's spine. A yelp of pain erupted from the dog, a sharp, piercing cry that echoed through the alley. It was a sound of agony, a testament to the immense pressure and pain it was enduring. But it was also a sound of triumph, a sign that the end was near. And then, freedom. The German shepherd's legs slipped free from the pipe's grasp. the rusted metal relinquishing its hold with a final agonizing groan. The animal collapsed onto the wet pavement beside the storm drain, its massive chest heaving with exhaustion, its body trembling with relief. It was free. Noah dropped the lever, the heavy wood clattering to the ground unnoticed. He fell to his knees beside the dog, his own body trembling with spent adrenaline and overwhelming relief. He reached out a hand, his fingers brushing against the dog's wet fur, reassuring himself that it was real, that the creature was truly free. "You did it!" he cried, forgetting for a moment that the dog couldn't understand his words. "You're free!" His voice was filled with a mixture of joy and disbelief, a triumphant shout that echoed through the storm. He had done it. He had overcome the impossible. He had saved a life. But their victory celebration was short-lived. The German shepherd tried to stand, its legs wobbling beneath its weight. It managed to push itself to its feet, but only for a fleeting moment. Then, with a whine of pain, it collapsed again, its legs buckling beneath it. Its freed leg was clearly injured, whether broken or merely wounded from being trapped, Noah couldn't tell. But it was evident that the dog couldn't walk, much less run to safety from the rising water. The alley was still flooded, the storm still raging. They were not out of danger yet. Noah looked around desperately, his elation quickly fading, replaced by a renewed sense of urgency. The storm was getting worse, the rain intensifying, the wind howling with renewed fury. The water in the alley was ankle-deep now and rising fast. They needed to get to higher ground to find shelter from the storm. But how could he move an animal that weighed more than he did? An animal that was injured and exhausted. He was just a small boy, barely able to lift a bag of groceries. How could he possibly carry a full-grown German shepherd to safety? The dog looked at Noah, its intelligent eyes filled with a silent question. "What now?" The unspoken query hung in the air, a plea for guidance, a reliance on the boy who had saved its life. Noah had no answer. He felt a wave of despair wash over him, a crushing sense of responsibility. He had freed the dog from the drain, but he couldn't save it from the storm. He had brought it to the brink of freedom only to abandon it to a watery grave. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would not abandon this dog, this brave, loyal creature that had fought so hard to live. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. He would not leave it to die alone in the flooded alley. He owed it that much. "I'll think of something," he promised, his voice trembling but filled with conviction. He gently placed his small hand on the dog's wet head, offering a silent reassurance. "I won't leave you." The German shepherd's tail moved slightly, not quite a wag, but an acknowledgement, a flicker of gratitude in the face of overwhelming adversity. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. And then, to Noah's surprise, the dog shifted its body painfully, dragging itself closer to him until its head rested against the boy's knee. Chapter 10, A Bond Forged in the Storm. The gesture was so trusting, so deliberately vulnerable, that Noah felt something swell in his chest, a feeling too big for his small body to contain. It was a surge of love, of protectiveness, of fierce loyalty that transcended the boundaries of species and circumstance. He felt an overwhelming responsibility for this creature, a deep-seated need to shield it from further harm. In that moment, as rain poured around them and thunder rolled overhead, a bond formed between the boy and the dog, a connection forged through struggle and compassion that neither could have anticipated when the day began. It was a bond that transcended words, a silent understanding that spoke of shared suffering and unwavering loyalty. It was a bond that would forever alter the course of their lives. Noah didn't know what would happen next or how he would save this injured animal. He had no plan, no resources, no idea how to overcome the seemingly insurmountable obstacles that lay ahead. He was just a small boy, facing a seemingly impossible task. But he knew with unwavering certainty that their paths had crossed for a reason, that there was a purpose to their meeting, a destiny that had brought them together in this dark, wet alley. He was meant to help this dog, and he would do everything in his power to ensure its survival. He placed his hand gently on the dog's head, feeling its warmth beneath the cold, wet fur. He felt the faint tremor of its muscles, the shallow rise and fall of its chest. It was alive, clinging to life with a tenacity that inspired him. "We'll figure this out together," he whispered, his voice filled with a quiet determination. He looked into those intelligent eyes, now holding a glimmer of trust, and he believed it. He believed that somehow, against all odds, they would find a way. They would overcome the storm, they would conquer the obstacles, they would find safety and solace together. The dog made a soft sound, not quite a bark, not quite a whimper, but something in between. It was a sound of acknowledgement, a sign that it understood, that it accepted, that it trusted. It was as if it was trying to communicate something important to the small boy who had freed it from the storm drain. Noah leaned closer, straining to understand. The dog's eyes never left his face, intense and searching. There was something in that gaze that made Noah feel like the dog wasn't just looking at him, but into him, seeing something that perhaps even Noah himself didn't know was there. It was a look that penetrated his defenses, that touched his very soul. "What is it?" Noah asked softly, his voice barely audible above the sound of the rain. "What are you trying to tell me?" He felt a strange sense of connection, a telepathic link that allowed him to glimpse the dog's thoughts, to understand its feelings without the need for words. The German shepherd shifted slightly, wincing in pain, but still trying to move closer to Noah. It lifted its head with obvious effort, its muscles straining, its body trembling with exhaustion. And then it pressed its cold, wet nose against the boy's cheek in a gesture that felt almost like a kiss. Noah's eyes widened in surprise, then filled with tears. The simple act of trust and affection from this injured animal touched something deep inside him, something that had been dormant since his father's death. It was a spark of hope, a flicker of light in the darkness, a reminder that even in the midst of despair, love and connection could still flourish. He wrapped his arms around the dog's neck, burying his face in its wet fur, not caring about the dirt or the cold or the rain that continued to pour around them. He held on tight, clinging to the warmth and the solidity of the animal, drawing strength from its presence. "I'll protect you," he whispered into the dog's ear, his voice filled with a fierce determination. "I promise." It was a vow, a sacred oath sworn in the heart of the storm. And he knew with absolute certainty that he would do everything in his power to keep it. Their journey had just begun. Chapter 11, Approaching Shadows. As they sat there, boy and dog, finding comfort in each other amid the storm, neither of them noticed the approaching shadows at the far end of the alley. Their focus was entirely on each other, their world reduced to the small circle of warmth and connection that they had created in the heart of the darkness. The outside world, with its dangers and uncertainties, had faded into insignificance. Nor did they hear, over the pounding rain and rumbling thunder, the sound of heavy footsteps splashing through puddles. The alley was a natural amplifier, but the storm was an even stronger force, masking the subtle sounds of approaching danger. Footsteps moving steadily, purposefully in their direction. Footsteps that held a sense of urgency, a sense of menace, a sense of impending doom. Footsteps that shattered the fragile peace of their sanctuary and heralded the arrival of a new and terrifying threat. Noah finally lifted his head, wiping rain and tears from his eyes, his small face streaked with dirt and exhaustion. He had been lost in a moment of connection, a brief respite from the harsh realities of their situation. But the storm was a constant reminder, and the cold seeping into his bones was a sharp prod to action. The German shepherd was still breathing heavily, its body trembling from cold and pain. The water in the alley had risen even higher now, nearly reaching Noah's knees as he knelt beside the injured animal. He knew they couldn't stay here much longer. The cold was relentless, and the threat of drowning was growing with each passing moment. "We need to get you somewhere safe," Noah said, his voice filled with urgency. He looked around desperately for shelter, for some kind of refuge from the storm. But the alley offered nothing, only more of the same, more rain, more darkness, more danger. The rain showed no signs of stopping, and the sky had grown darker as afternoon faded toward evening. The light was fading fast, and the shadows were lengthening, transforming the familiar landscape into a menacing realm of distorted shapes and hidden dangers. Soon his mother would discover he was missing. She would be worried sick, consumed by a fear that he knew all too well. Maybe even angry, her anxiety manifesting as frustration and reprimand. The thought of her worry added another layer of guilt to his already burdened conscience. But how could he leave this dog behind? How could he abandon this loyal creature who had placed its trust in him, who had fought so hard to survive? He couldn't. He wouldn't. He had made a promise, and he would keep it, no matter the consequences. Noah tried to think what his father would do in this situation. His dad had always known exactly what to do in emergencies, his calm demeanor and decisive actions a source of comfort and security in times of crisis. It was part of being a police officer, part of the oath he had sworn to protect and serve. He'd told Noah, more times than he could count, "When someone needs help, you help them. That's what makes us human. That's what separates us from the animals." His father's words echoed in his mind, a guiding principle that illuminated his path. The memory strengthened Noah's resolve. He had to get help, but he couldn't leave the dog alone in the rising water, vulnerable to the storm and the unknown dangers that lurked in the shadows. He had to find a way to save both of them. Noah stood up, his small legs unsteady in the current, his knees trembling with exhaustion. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever lay ahead. "I'm going to get help," he told the German shepherd, his voice firm despite the tremor in his legs. "But I'll come right back, I promise." He offered a silent reassurance, a pledge to return, no matter the obstacles. As if understanding his words, the dog let out a sharp, pained yelp. It was a sound of desperation, a pleading cry that resonated deep within Noah's heart. It was a sound that shattered his resolve and brought him to a standstill. The dog's eyes locked with his, and Noah saw something there that broke his heart. Fear. Not just fear of pain, or the rising water, or the looming darkness, but fear of abandonment. Chapter 12, Abandonment's Shadow. "You don't want me to leave you," Noah whispered, understanding dawning on his young face. The realization hit him like a physical blow, a crushing weight of responsibility that settled heavily on his shoulders. He was all this creature had, its only hope, its only source of comfort in a world that had turned against it. The thought of abandoning it, of leaving it alone to face its fate, was unbearable. The dog whimpered again, confirming his suspicion. It was a sound of pure vulnerability, a desperate plea that tore at his heartstrings. It was as if the animal was saying, "Don't leave me, I'm scared, I can't do this alone." Noah knelt back down, his small hand instinctively reaching out to touch the dog's head, to offer a silent reassurance. He couldn't leave, he wouldn't leave, he had made a promise, and he would keep it, no matter the cost, even if it meant facing his fears, defying his mother, and risking his own safety. He couldn't turn his back on a creature in need. "Okay," he said softly, his voice filled with compassion and resolve. "I won't leave you. We'll figure something else out." He repeated the vow that he was making to the dog and to himself. But what could he do? He was just a small boy, armed with nothing but good intentions and a broken piece of wood. The dog was far too heavy for him to carry, its injured leg rendering it immobile. The water was getting deeper by the minute, the storm was intensifying, and time was running out. If they stayed much longer, they'd both be in serious danger. The odds were stacked against them. The situation seemed hopeless. But Noah refused to surrender. 2. He looked at the dog's injured leg, his eyes searching for any sign of hope. It wasn't bleeding heavily, but it was bent at an awkward angle where it had been caught in the pipe. The bone was likely broken, a painful injury that would require immediate medical attention. The dog couldn't walk on its own, and Noah couldn't carry it. He needed something, some kind of tool, some kind of conveyance that would allow him to transport the injured animal to safety. What would his father do in this impossible situation? James Wilson, the brave and resourceful police officer, the man who always had a plan, always knew how to overcome any obstacle. What would he do?
And then an idea sparked in Noah's mind, a memory surfacing from the depths of his childhood, his red wagon. It was in the shed behind their house, just at the other end of the alley. It wasn't very big, but it was sturdy, a reliable vehicle that had served him well in countless imaginary adventures. It might just be big enough to carry the injured dog, to transport it to safety.
It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the only idea he had, and he was running out of time. He had to try. "I have an idea," he told the dog, his voice more confident now, his eyes shining with hope. "But I have to leave for just a minute. I'm going to get something to help move you. I'll be right back, I promise." He hoped the dog would understand, that it would trust him enough to wait. The dog whimpered again, but less frantically this time, as if it sensed Noah's determination, as if it recognized the glint of hope in his eyes. It was still scared, still in pain, but it seemed to have accepted its fate, to have placed its trust in the small boy who had become its unlikely savior. "Count to 100, Noah said, remembering how his mother would say this whenever she had to leave him for a short time. It was a ritual, a comforting mantra that helped to ease his anxiety. "Before you finish, I'll be back." It was a promise, a sacred pledge that he intended to keep. With one last reassuring pat on the dog's head, Noah stood and splashed through the water toward the end of the alley that led to his backyard. His heart pounded with fear and determination, a frantic drumbeat against the rising tide of anxiety. He'd never broken a promise before, and he wouldn't start now. The dog was counting on him. Chapter 13, Racing Against the Shadows. Noah had only made it halfway down the alley, his small legs churning through the water, his mind racing with a mixture of hope and fear, when a sound froze him in place. It wasn't the thunder, which continued to rumble in the distance, a constant reminder of the storm's power. It wasn't the rain, which still fell in sheets, blurring the world into a watery haze. This sound was different. This sound made his blood run cold, a primal instinct warning him of imminent danger, barking, loud, aggressive barking coming from the opposite end of the alley, from the direction he had been trying so desperately to escape. He turned, his heart leaping into his throat, his breath catching in his chest. He squinted through the rain, his eyes straining to pierce the gloom. At first he saw nothing but shadows, distorted shapes looming in the distance, playing tricks on his imagination. But then, as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw them. Two large, shadowy figures moving toward him, and the injured German shepherd. They were still too far away to make out any details, but their presence was undeniable, a looming threat that sent a shiver down his spine. As they came closer, Noah could make out that they were men, their bodies bulky and menacing, their faces obscured by the rain and the shadows cast by their hoods. They were dressed in dark raincoats, their clothes blending seamlessly with the darkness of the alley, making them almost invisible. One of them held something in his hand, something long and thin, that glinted menacingly in the dim light. It looked like a stick, or maybe a pipe, a weapon that could inflict serious damage. The barking was coming from behind them, a furious, unrelenting barrage that sent echoes reverberating between the buildings. Another dog, larger and fiercer looking than the injured German shepherd, straining at a leash held by one of the men. Its teeth flashed white in the dim light as it lunged forward, pulling its handler along with a force that seemed almost uncontrollable. Noah's instincts screamed danger. These men weren't here to help. They weren't lost, confused, or simply seeking shelter from the storm. The way they moved, purposeful and threatening, told him everything he needed to know. They were searching for something or someone, and the aggressive dog they brought with them was clearly hunting. With a jolt of clarity that seemed beyond his years, Noah realized they were looking for the German shepherd. They had tracked it to this alley, and they weren't going to stop until they found it. He had to protect Rex. Without thinking, without hesitating for even a single second, Noah splashed back toward the injured dog, his fear momentarily overshadowed by a surge of protectiveness. He had made a promise, and he would keep it, no matter the cost. The German shepherd had raised its head and was growling softly, its eyes fixed on the approaching figures. Despite its weakness, despite its pain, it was trying to stand, its good legs bracing against the wet pavement, its injured leg hovering uselessly above the water. It was ready to defend itself, to protect its territory, to stand against whatever threat approached. "Shh," Noah whispered urgently, placing his hand gently on the dog's head, trying to calm it. He knew that the dog's growling would only attract the men's attention, that it would betray their hiding place. "They'll hear you." The German shepherd looked at Noah, then back at the approaching men, its growl subsiding to a low rumble, but its body remained tense, poised for defense despite its obvious weakness. It was torn between its instinct to protect and its trust in the boy who had saved its life. Noah looked around frantically for a hiding place, a refuge from the approaching danger. But the alley offered little cover. A few dumpsters, their rusted metal scarred with graffiti and grime. Some broken pallets leaning against the wall, their splintered wood offering no real protection. The recessed doorways of abandoned buildings, dark and ominous, their entrances boarded up and sealed. None seemed adequate to hide a small boy and a large dog from determined searchers. They needed a miracle. Chapter 14, Between Shadows and Garbage. But they had to try. They had to find some semblance of cover, some small advantage against the overwhelming odds. Giving up wasn't an option, not now. Noah scanned the alley again, his eyes darting from one potential hiding spot to another, desperately searching for any sign of hope. And then he spotted it. A narrow gap between two dumpsters where shadows gathered thickly, a pocket of darkness in the already dimly lit alley. It wasn't much, barely enough space for one person to squeeze through, let alone a small boy and a large injured dog. But it was the best they had, their only chance of evading detection. If they could squeeze into that space, press themselves against the cold, damp wall, and remain perfectly still, maybe, just maybe, the men would pass by without seeing them. Maybe they would mistake them for shadows, for piles of garbage, for just another part of the alley's desolate landscape. "Come on," Noah urged the dog, his voice barely a whisper. He tugged gently at the loose skin around its neck, trying to guide it toward the narrow gap. "We have to hide." The German shepherd seemed to understand the urgency in Noah's voice. It responded to his gentle tug, its eyes fixed on the small space between the dumpsters, its body tensing with determination. It was in pain, its injured leg dragging uselessly behind it, but it was willing to do whatever it took to protect itself and the boy who had saved its life. With tremendous effort, it dragged itself forward, using its front legs to pull its body through the water while keeping its injured back leg elevated. Each movement clearly caused pain, its muscles straining, its body trembling with the effort. But the dog's eyes remained fixed on Noah, trusting him completely, relying on his guidance, offering its unwavering loyalty in the face of overwhelming adversity. Together, they struggled toward the small gap between the dumpsters, a slow and agonizing progress through the rising water. The space was barely big enough for both of them, a cramped and claustrophobic haven in the midst of the storm. But Noah pressed himself against the wall, making room for the dog to collapse beside him, partially hidden by shadows and garbage bags. The smell was overwhelming, a pungent mixture of decay and refuse that assaulted their senses. But they couldn't afford to complain. They had to remain silent, motionless, invisible. Their lives depended on it. Just in time. The men were close enough now that Noah could hear their voices over the rain, their words clipped and harsh, filled with impatience and menace. The sound sent a shiver down his spine, a reminder of the danger they faced. "The tracker says it's here somewhere," one man said, his voice gruff and impatient. He was holding some kind of small device, a high-tech instrument that beeped steadily, its signal growing stronger as they approached. "It better be," the second man replied, his voice equally harsh, laced with a threat that sent a chill through Noah's bones. "The boss wants that dog found before it leads anyone back to us." Noah's heart pounded so loudly he was sure the men would hear it, the frantic rhythm echoing in the confined space between the dumpsters. He pressed himself deeper into the shadows, trying to become invisible, trying to disappear into the darkness. The German shepherd pressed closer to him, its body trembling. From cold, pain, or fear, Noah couldn't tell. He just knew that he had to protect it, that he had to shield it from the approaching danger. He gently wrapped his small arm around the dog's neck, offering what comfort he could, a silent promise of unwavering loyalty. Chapter 15. The Beep and the Breath. "If it's injured, it couldn't have gone far," the first man said, his voice growing louder as they drew closer, their heavy footsteps splashing through the water just a few feet from their hiding place. "Check behind those dumpsters. Could be hiding there, the dumb mutt." Noah held his breath, his lungs burning, his muscles aching from the strain of remaining still. The German shepherd beside him went completely still, as if it too understood the need for absolute silence. Its body was tense, every muscle coiled, ready to spring into action if necessary. But it remained motionless, trusting in Noah's judgment, placing its fate in his small hands. The only sound was the steady patter of rain, a relentless drumming that seemed to amplify the tension in the air. The occasional rumble of distant thunder, a low, ominous growl that underscored the sense of impending doom. And the frantic beating of Noah's heart, a deafening rhythm that threatened to betray their hiding place. The beam of a flashlight swept over their hiding place, a blinding ray of light that pierced the shadows, illuminating the grimy space between the dumpsters. Noah pressed himself deeper into the darkness, pulling the dog closer, trying to shield it from the probing light. The light paused, hovered at the edge of their concealment. A mere step closer and the men would see them. Their hiding place would be exposed. Their fate would be sealed. The wait felt like an eternity, each second stretching into an agonizing eternity. Then, miraculously, a clap of thunder directly overhead made both men jump. The sudden noise startled them, momentarily diverting their attention. In that same instant, the tracker device in the first man's hand beeped more rapidly, its electronic signal growing stronger, pointing towards the opposite end of the alley. It was a stroke of luck, a twist of fate that offered a brief reprieve from the impending danger. "Signal's moving," he said, his attention diverted. "Down there, toward the end of the alley. Must have crawled further than we thought." He sounded annoyed, impatient, eager to resume the hunt. The flashlight beams swung away, the blinding light lifting, offering a momentary respite from the oppressive tension. The men sloshed through the water in the opposite direction, their heavy footsteps fading into the distance. The aggressive dog still straining at its leash, its keen nose twitching, trying to pull them toward Noah's hiding place. It sensed something out of place, something that didn't belong. But its instincts were ignored, overruled by the cold, calculating logic of the tracking device. "The mutt's picking up something," the second man said, gesturing to their dog. He seemed to have more faith in the animal's instincts than his companion.
"Tracker's more reliable than that animal's nose in this weather," the first man replied dismissively. He was the leader, the one in charge, and his word was law. "Come on, let's get this done."
They moved away, following the beeping device rather than their dog's instincts, their footsteps growing fainter as they disappeared into the darkness. Noah didn't understand his luck. Why would a tracking device lead them away when the dog was right here, hiding just a few feet away? Why were they trusting technology over instinct? He wasn't going to question it. It was a gift, a miracle, a second chance that he couldn't afford to squander. Only when the sound of their footsteps had faded completely, when the alley was silent once more save for the sound of the rain, did Noah dare to breathe normally again. He released his grip on the dog, his muscles aching, his lungs burning, his heart still pounding with